What's going on, Mark?
Oh man, not too much. Feeling a lot better. Feeling
You
like my
sound a lot
old
better.
self again. Yeah. So, figure if I
Nice,
can
nice.
survive exercise, I'm good. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So
So,
you were talking about some challenges with your reef tank, like during COVID,
yeah.
and I really loved our last session about kind of like some of the sacrifices that we need to make and some of the tough decisions we need to make to actually have a better reef tank because that was a really organic. We did not like start that session talking about, with the intention of discussing that topic. It just kind of morphed into that.
Yeah.
And I thought it was just, there's a lot of more subtle things about every hobby that, is not, doesn't make for great conversation, but I think once you have that inception of the idea and you consider some of those things like, hey, maybe do less on your reef tank or have fewer corals or fewer fish or something like that, or get rid of corals that aren't exactly thriving. I think there's a lot of topics like that that we can learn from.
Yeah, it's like sometimes these self-help books or books about, how to make your life better. You read them and sometimes the chapters are really obvious, but they at least hammer into it to make you think about it. And when I chat, on these, I feel like that's what we're doing. Like at first, it seems like we're stating the obvious, but it's the putting the emphasis on it to make it more of a conviction in a person, right? And
Yeah, no, absolutely.
so,
So were you able to rectify some of the things going on in your LPS lagoon tank?
I'm working on it. It's weird. It's in the same place that my old Red Sea tank was. That I for a while struggled with dinos, and for some reason, this tank has become infested with dinos, and I've got the temp up to 83 right now. So I'll try to give that another week because I was upset before I left for Colorado. I set it up to 82 and nothing happened, and I was like, oh, my temperature approach ain't working this time. However, I wondered that I'm using a different temperature probe, um, and you know how those CJ pumps have
Oh yeah, they got it built in.
yeah, and that the pump temperature was reporting the tank temperature being much lower. So I thought, oh, maybe I haven't hit that critical temperature threshold yet, and the temperature probe I was basing it on was running a little. It was reading higher than it maybe was, so I raised it another degree, and I'll give that another week. But the other things I did is I threw in a bunch of easy pellet eating type of fish to try to up the bioload because my nitrates and my phosphates are completely bottomed out, and I am trying to dose those back up. But I thought, the hell with it, add some fish, and then something that a lot of the dino guys are doing is trying to just add more diversity, right? So
Ooh, man. I want to unpack what you just said. Dino guys,
oh yeah, man,
people who
there's
have so much experience with dinoflagellates that it's like their main challenge in life.
There are
Ooh,
support groups on Facebook. I joined one this week just to see if anything's changed because it's been a while since I've been at war with dinos. But there is something interesting about this is no longer a succession type of algae that happens in the beginning. It's this weird persistent plague that shows up and just won't go away. And
I
yeah,
I started getting some dinoflagellates in my kind of low light LPS tank, and it was bona fide dinos, like nothing else growing among it
yeah,
on the wall. And I did a video of it, and I was like, all right, I'm just going to dose some iron and raise the temperature a little bit. And I didn't really follow up with it. Just a few weeks later, there was no dinos, and I felt like I didn't want to put the video out because I thought it might be a little bit I don't know, preachy and not really giving any. I mean, this it worked for me. There is not a
right.
trace of dinoflagellates in the tank now, but I just somehow transcribing that onto somebody else's aquarium and showing it as an example. Something about it just didn't feel totally right. So that is actually a rare video that I aborted. We did the video, filmed it over a few days. There was just something about it. I just don't want to get up there and be like, hey, look at me. I just dust a little bit of iron and raise the temperature a little bit, and boom, they're gone. And
yeah, and I think that was a smart move, because I've heard some of the other experts in the hobby be like, I don't get what the big deal with dinos is. Just have a blackout for a few days and it goes away, And I'm like, don't you think these people have tried everything? I mean, like when you're fighting them for 6 months, you have tried the kitchen sink, right? So, yeah, no, I had the same with the temperature thing. Like, hey guys, this worked for me, but
I did that.
Yeah,
that tank didn't have a heater. It was the coldest tank in the whole studio because naturally most LPS corals come from a little bit deeper water. It's going to be a little colder, so that's how I kept it. So I actually plugged it in and just raised it to like 78, added some iron, didn't really think about it, and removed the diatoms is what I'm used to talking about, right? Dinoflagellates, maybe once or twice. And then I forgot about it and looked at the tank and like, dude, you can't even find a speck of it. But there's something about it, that video, that I was like, I don't know if this is the right message to put out there, because it does seem like, God, we never even talked about dinoflagellates, right? Other than in the context of Symbiodinium and Zooxanthellae, like that's dinoflagellates, right? We need them for our corals to grow. And yeah, I don't think any of the reef books even talk about it.
No, I mean, and it seems like the advice, I mean, there's typically a couple of different strains that people struggle with. One of them tends to respond really well to UV. And if you got that one, cool, just, pony up the cash for a UV sterilizer and you're good. And then the other kind, it seems like the most people that beat them, they just end up having to increase the microbial diversity, essentially add more competitors, right? So it's like copepods and a lot of them like report success dosing phyto, which I don't know if the phyto itself is stimulating a more diverse microbiome, or if you're essentially fertilizing the tank because of remnant iron and other,
everything that's in the phytoplankton solution.
Yeah, so
this kind of goes back to that session that we had about the scientific things that you wish, or the aquaristic problems that you think we could benefit from someone taking a more scientific approach to examining.
Yeah.
And so this is one of those, like, I don't want to be patronizing, but like, oh, hey, just raise your temperature and dose some iron. It's worked for me a couple times, but I don't know. I've just heard the pushback from so many people. And kind of along those lines, I think it was right after you visited, I added a little bit of ozone to the 400 that wouldn't clear up from a bacterial bloom. And just seeing the benefits from that, I realized that I actually had 2 ozonizers. So I took the 200 milligram per hour off the 400 and put the 50 milligram on there. And I took the 200 milligram and put it on the main system. I'll tell you what, man, like, corals have never looked better. Probably the water's clearer, and it's just knocked back that biology a little bit. I just see less of that microbial soup that you talk about. And I think I name checked you in the video of the reef wall. And I have huge UVs. And I just feel like maybe a more chemical approach is more what I'm looking for to raise my ORP and to introduce a little bit of sterilization in only one of my protein skimmers, rather than adding 100-watt UV that is going to heat the tank, and it's going to require a pump, and it's 2 things to plug in. And if you only have 1 tank, yeah, sure, by all means, go ahead. But I got a few hundred things plugged in here. One of these days, I'm going to go around and just count how many outlets, how many things are just plugged in. But I think there's a lot more conversation to be had about the ozone. I've been learning a lot more about what is reduction specifically and what is oxidation specifically, and I think there's a lot of gains to be had there.
Yeah, I ran back in when Red Sea used to make a unit, I ran a Red Sea ozonizer on a 180 for a year. And
Red Sea Aquazone.
The Aquazone, yeah. And
Did you have the one with the built-in ORP probe?
No, and I didn't even measure ORP. I just ran it into a skimmer. And it worked. I mean, I had nothing bad to say about it. I tried to revisit ozone when I was battling dinos the first time, but I ordered a UV bulb-based ozonizer from, I
Mm-hmm.
think, Ultra Reef or Ultra something. And it was their nano model, but that thing nuked my basement. Like I turned it on, went to bed, and I woke up the next morning and came down here, and I was like, "Oh God, like my lungs are burning." Um, it was a little, even though they called it a nano, I think it was just too intense. So I at that point I didn't revisit it because I was just like, "Yeah, this is not good for my health." But like a small unit. And who is it? I think like Oh Too Many Fish. I remember reading a lot of his posts on the forums.
Dave Botwin.
Botwin,
I talked
yeah.
to him periodically. Yeah.
That dude would just like bubble ozone with an air stone in a tank, and in his fish only system. And so I do feel like some of the concerns around ozone are probably a bit overblown, like the whole boric acid or boron, whatever. Yeah. What is it? Borate? Whatever the.
Right when I installed the ozonizers, I went and did a bunch of, let's just call it skimming, right? Because I wasn't doing research. I was just skimming on the effects of ozone because I'm, in here, and sometimes we have to close it up because it's either too cold or too hot. And they were just talking about, some basic respiratory, issues and maybe light headaches. But man, when I worked in the reef shops in the late 90s, we would push so much ozone through the tiniest, shittiest, poorest excuses for a protein skimmer. You remember the cylinders that were like built into sumps, and they had like a Rio 400 or 600
Yeah.
little pseudo noodle wheel thing, and it would always smell like ozone over there. And we'd ran ozone on several systems around the store, and no one ever batted an eye about any potential health effects. For sure, if you really, really smell it and you can't get away from it, that's not a good condition like what you're talking about. But I think there's more research to be done, but I don't think it's as dangerous as some people are gun shy about.
It's so unstable that it doesn't have a long existence in your air, right? It's going to find something to react with, and it's going to break down.
Yeah.
So, I remember somebody recommending like, oh, just turn it off maybe a few hours before you wake up and come down into that space, and you probably won't smell anything anymore because it's all broken down. And I thought, yeah, that maybe that's an idea, but yeah, I'm going the opposite. I'm trying to add more diversity to try to outcompete this stuff, just because I don't know what else to do with it. It's so frustrating. I hate that stuff. And it makes your tank smell like
It makes it like low tide.
yeah, oh, it's brutal. Yeah. Because I work down here, like I got my day job, and then the tank's just over there, and it's like, oh man, I don't want to smell that the whole day while I'm working. So but we'll get there.
We're such complementary reefers because you have your controller for a bunch of stuff, and I try to, just use controllable devices. And my entire reefing philosophy is aiming for less biology and less ecology and less factors. And that's what I'm trying to do with the ozone. And I got the 400-gallon test tube with 3 acros in it, and trying to just scrape down everything and kill sponges. God, if you guys just knew how much I have to deal with sponges. I think sponges are so cool. And they're so like fascinating pseudo animals. I mean, they're animalia, but they're not really an organism, right? It's a colony of cells. I have so many different types. I'm like, I wish I had a fish or some creature that was specifically, sponge eating. Thanks, guy. Amazon dude just walked in the studio and put my stuff down over here.
Nice. Yeah, I think if I went with your methodology, I do feel like sometimes you got to match the methodology to the personality. I would run in like I've noticed on this tank, for example, and that's my canary in the coal mine, is if I don't see turf algae growing where the tangs can't reach it,
Yeah, like right at the overflow teeth or
Yeah.
your nozzle outlet.
that's when I know like dinos are not going to be able to survive, right? But in this tank, the overflow teeth and the return nozzles are spotless. I mean, they're freaking spotless, except for some coralline algae, which to me is the red flag, right? Like there is no complex algae there to compete with these dinos. So, which I don't know. So yeah, like I look at your very sterile tanks, And I'm like, if I did that, it'd be like covered in brown goo, you know? So, just my luck.
If you set up a tank with hypothetical test tube corals, I don't think you'd ever battle dinos or Valonia or Aptasia or Mahanos or just random coral illnesses that we can't put our finger on. And I wouldn't have to run UV. I wouldn't have to run ozone, right? I got corals from literally every place that corals come from so many different reefers. And it feels like the tanks that are newer and that have corals from fewer of my tanks, there's just there's no mystery ailments with certain corals. I have a hospital tank for corals because every now and then a Ghani, a Duncan, an LPS coral, and certain acros, certain millipora. I feel like in the future, someone's going to look at all the acros and actually split them up. Like in more, maybe in a subgeneric level, there is so much diversity there. And morphologically, like, okay, sure, they all have the axial tip, but the behavior, like even from a millipore to a spathulata, I absolutely rock it with a spathulata. No problems. That one little colony that you were looking at grew from just a tiny little. If you could see that thing since I've been running ozone for a week, maybe it's been 2 weeks now. It's brilliant. Last night I turned off the lights on the coral flat with all the acros, and I was just observing the corals. And it wasn't just about the color. It was just the vibrance and the polyp extension and the tissue, like the tissuiness of each of these SPS corals. I was just like floored. I got this one coral. I don't know if you recall the one that I call like the tabling stag or the semi-stag. That's in one of the corners, and it's really big. It's just an interesting shade of kind of transparent lime green, right? Because it's not solid green. And I was just looking at it, and it doesn't have any crazy colors to be really obviously top of the page on Instagram. But I was just looking at it like, man, this thing is just so awesome and just looking so great. I don't know where I was going with that. But yeah, corals are so different. From even within the acros. So
it's an interesting point, because it's a pretty broad genus and so many different morphologies within that genus. And then, like you said, I mean, even two corals that sort of resemble each other physically, apparently physiologically, is that the word I'm looking for? Differ greatly, right? So yeah, it's funny you bring that up. I've never thought about that. But yeah, like one day somebody's going to go in there, maybe with DNA sequencing or something, and be like, wait a minute, guys. Because you always also wonder, like, convergent evolution, right? Where you've got geckos in Australia and in the Americas that have no common ancestor, but just evolution pushed them to turn into the same thing. You have to kind of wonder if that's true for corals too, right? I mean, that branching small polyp type of species fulfills that niche really well. So who knows if you've got two types of Acropora that have no ancestors, but they just convergently evolved to sort of look similar, So anyway,
you could make the same case for Tagastes, red bugs. You can make the same case for acro-eating flatworms in a tank where, filled with happy, thriving corals in great conditions. The acro-eating flatworms will be much more attracted to millipores.
Yeah.
Not at first with all the polyp tentacles out, right? The flatworms can't rest on them. But once they get in there, then they really take off. So I have a little bit of acro-eating flatworms that in my Amazon order, I got a pet treatment that I'm going to start trying out for acro-eating flatworms that I've been wanting to do for a very long time.
Is it that fenbendazole or whatever?
Fenbendazole. It's come up more than once over the years. And I did some actual research on there, reading peer-reviewed literature, and it's seems to be very specific. And I think if Dustin Dorton was still really manning the helm of the acro production at ORA, someone like him would have come up with a treatment for acro-eating flatworms. I'm the most cavalier at treating the whole tank. I got no problems with it because I understand a little bit more about how these different chemicals and compounds work, right? And they're really, really targeted. So thankfully, I have a quarantine tank. But what I was going to say is that, you know that if you have a tortuosa or an austera of any variety, those corals just grow like freaking, they just grow.
Yeah.
Even in bad conditions, they will just grow slower. And there's just something about them that's really different from, let's say, Acropora gemifera. Gemifera doesn't really occur in the reef aquarium hobby because it is so picky. You go out of the wild, it is incredibly common, like incredibly common. But in this one tank that I know I have acroreading flatworms, there's only a couple smaller, smoother, not smooth skin, but smoother colonies that are really affected. Meanwhile, I don't even bother looking at my red dragon. That thing's growing so fast. I wish it did have acroreading flatworms to slow it down a little bit, right? So yeah, that's where I'm at. God, I wish you could have seen the acros last night. It was just pimping. I did so much cleanup after you visited. I wish you could see the tanks now.
Well, that's what happened to me. You came for the Aquatic Expo, and my wife convinced me not to clean the back glass because she's like, I like the coralline. I'm like, all right. And then I finally got fed up and did it. I was like, why didn't I do this before Jake visited? Because you could actually see the dimensionality of the aquascape now, right? It didn't blend into the background. I was like pissed at myself. And then the sand bed or the gravel in the bigger tanks just magically went white again. Like whatever that turf that showed up for a bit went away. And I'm like, okay, thanks guys. Now that everybody's left the building, now you look nice.
Yeah, no, that's how it goes, man. I don't know how many times, almost every time I visit a store or somebody's tank, they're always like, oh, you should have been here last week. We had so many corals. Or you should have been here, a couple of days ago. Everything was pimping a little bit more, but I'm hitting this problem. But
I got a question for you. Is the goni that's just kind of hanging in there in your Starkey damsel tank, is that an amazeballs?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, I got the same problem. All of a sudden.
Gosh. Freaking Beelzebub.
I have so many different gonies, and they're all like, I'm good. And then the amazeballs is like all closed up, pissed off. I'm like, what? Everybody's happy except you. Like, what is your problem?
Dude, that exact thing happened to my amazeballs. Literally surrounded by pure gonies. They weren't touching it, even though they can touch. And just one day it shut down. To its credit, my nutrients were probably close to zero because that's before I was really on the ball with nitrate testing because Hannah came out with the high range nitrate checker. But I still have my piece. That thing was in hospice for almost a year before it's really started putting polyps out. God, if I ever grow that thing for real.
If it comes back, yeah, it's like a phoenix. I'm going to move mine to my bigger tank and just see if a change in scenery, a change in chemistry, whatever, just see what happens.
Dude, this really highlights what we were talking about last time. And for the females listening, I apologize, but for the guys will understand when you're chasing a love interest and it just doesn't love you back, it's just stringing you along in some way or another, and you find another partner or coral that is going to be happy in your tank. Dude, I'll take a normal, happy, huge Stokeseye over a tiny, pissed off amazeballs every day of the week.
It's just funny how the most expensive one is the one that's like, no, screw you. Like all the other ones are fine, and some of the other ones are beautiful. So it's not really like a color thing or anything. It's just it's like, oh, that one cost you the most? Okay, that one's going to be pissy as hell. It's like, come on, man.
Well, so the inverse is rarely true.
Yeah.
This is why I rave about the hoaxum I collected from Australia that I call the hardline hokey. It seems like it would have a permit to be pissy.
Right.
It deserves like it, right?
It deserves to be a high maintenance coral the way it looks.
Right, but it's turned out the opposite. I've shared so much of that coral. I just sent some out yesterday to Chris Meckley. And in every tank I have it in, it's just blue or bluer and grows faster. You were with me when we planted it in the 400 gallon along with the rainbow tip thin stag. It looks amazing. The only thing I could say is I'm maybe overlighting it with white, not the blue hoaxamite, but the rainbow tip stag, and it's like really just light yellow overall with just pink tips. But just the last couple of days, I've been looking at the tips. I'm like, they're really growing, really growing. That's because I only set up like a 12-hour, 100% full blast spectrum that simply turns off. Because when I set up the tank, I'm just like, oh, here you go. Here's a schedule. Here's enough light for you guys. But now I need to tweak it a little bit more to have a longer tail at the dawn and dusk cycle and give it a little bit more blue. I think it's going to make it a little bit more colorful. But yeah, the Hoaxami is the hardline Hokie is the opposite. And I know a lot of people who worked with Hoaxami in the 2010s, and dude, it was always a tough one.
Yeah, the
Always
one
tough.
I got from Atlantis Aquarium or whatever, Atlantis Marine out in Cali, that thing was real finicky. And it looked just, it had the similar type of growth. And then I got one from you, I want to say back in 2015, and that one it was a bit hardier for me, but
Yeah.
anyway, yeah.
I have two other Hoaxami strains. I think the one is the really old Legacy Blue Matrix. Super fuzzy, but does not grow like the hardline Hokie. And then a more Indo one that's definitely teal with bluer tips. You saw it, in my middle coral flat. It's nice, but it's nothing like the hardline Hokie. I mean, that thing looks like blue LED color, not royal blue, but like 470 nanometer blue from top to bottom. It just goes from blue to bluer. So that's why I rave about that coral, because it seems like it would be a lot more, demanding. Dude, that thing never skips a beat. Never skips a beat.
Yeah, that's nice that there are some corals like that. Like red gonies are obviously very colorful. They tend to be real hardy. Glitter bombs I've heard are terrible. Glitter bomb gonies. I haven't even tried one of those, but everything I read says that those are real finicky. It's just frustrating. It's interesting. Again, similar to what you were saying about acros, and here you have these gonioperas that clearly are all look to be related, but yet physiologically, man, that's a long word. They all just behave differently. They all have different quirks, and it's just interesting.
Yeah. No, the continental divide between the behavior of a spathulata from a Millipora just blows my mind. But I have more millies now. Now that I'm keeping my nutrients up, I'm seeing a lot more vitality and health and color and growth from my millies. But for some reason, I don't know, maybe spathulata is a little bit more of an outer reef coral. And I know from my experience personally, like seeing a ton of millies, they're like inshore. They're usually a lot more closer to shore, pretty shallow water, oftentimes turbid.
Yeah.
And so maybe they just need that much more food. So they might be similar, but Milliporas just went a certain direction. Speaking of which, one thing I'm missing from my coral collection? Millipora. Millipora fire coral.
Oh, no, don't do it.
I know, but there's like some really cool one. They're Millipora complanata. Grows into like big fat blades, not alcicornis. Like screw that. You can keep it unless you grow it on an old sea fan skeleton. Then it looks really, really cool. But I remember Peter Wilkins' tank.
That's what I was going to bring up. Yeah.
The whole back was just this light golden brown color.
Can you imagine doing maintenance on that tank?
Oh my God, no. And if you had a ton in the tank, man, that thing would probably sting you without touching it.
Yeah.
Just all those nematocysts would just be in the water. But yeah, it's actually something I'm missing. There's another one, Millipora squarosa. Kind of grows into like these square tubes. It's really rare. You know what? It's weird. In the Caribbean, Millipora can be really dominant, but there's not a ton, but maybe like a dozen or so species in the Pacific, and they're like rare and endangered. It's crazy. It's really, really strange that in one ocean it's weedy, and in the other ocean it's very rare.
Yeah.
Maybe because they're currently getting outcompeted by the corals that are still out there.
Yeah, maybe in the Caribbean they took a hold just because a lot of the other dominant stony corals are in decline, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, good luck with that. I hope it doesn't spread like wildfire on you.
Well, no, I don't have any.
Yeah.
But you know what I do have?
What?
I got a zebra tang.
Nice. Where'd you get that?
Mauritius.
Nice.
Yeah, got it from Mauritius. Sent to me by my sister, Monica Gorobi, my sister at heart. Sent to me by Tank Stop. So thanks to those guys. And man, he is a perfect specimen. He just hit the ground, hit the water, 10 minutes in, throw some flake in there, and he's going crazy. I think I've had him a week or so, and now he's just a piggy pig. He's already put on a little bit of weight, but he's got crazy nice facial markings, and I just like, I want more, but I know they're not, we don't even know enough to know if they're like a schooling fish.
The only one I've ever seen scuba diving was in Mozambique, and it was solitary, which I thought was interesting. But it could have just been a stray.
I didn't know you saw one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, no, they're nothing like convicts.
Yeah.
They don't school, like they congregate a little bit. I saw them in the wild in southern Mauritius. Apparently, they also occur in Mayotte, Comoros, and Reunion, maybe southern Madagascar. So that's cool that you saw it in Mozambique. Was that in northern Mozambique?
Southern, right across the border from South Africa. I only saw one, and I followed that thing around for like 15 minutes, burning up my oxygen.
How have you never told me this story?
I did. I thought I did, but yeah, it's in that crappy video I made back in the day of the thing. But yeah, I remember, I went all the way down to South Durban thinking I'm going to go see some king eye angels. Didn't see squat, which frustrated me. But then the people I dove with were just, South Africans are like the nicest people, right? And they were like, hey, grab a burger with us. Hey, why don't you go camp with us and scuba dive? And I'm like, wait, camping and scuba diving combined? I'm like, sign me up. I would love that.
Yeah.
And then I felt like that single gem tang, and this was before they became more prevalent in the trade, because this was way back, I think 08 maybe.
Dude, in here, actually, one of these copies of Giant Clams is signed by Klaus Janssen.
Oh, nice.
The founder of Royal Exclusive. He was at my house for Reefstock MACNA 2014. And he shows so many different, like, old school German exhibits from late 80s, early 90s. And every single one of them had a gem tang. And I'm like, where the hell are these coming from? And I don't know that they had fish from Mauritius back then. But they were clearly had a much more direct line to the Western Indian Ocean. But yeah, I know what you mean. There was a time where like this giant clam book had more pictures of giant clams than even a book about fish identification.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I thought it was like my concession for not seeing the king eye angel. I was like, oh, I got to see something rare, But
so I know we've mentioned this before because I went to South Africa and I specifically tasked my dive guide with finding me some, and we came up with the hand signals of tiger, angel. I remember getting to that habitat and be like, this doesn't feel right. No, I don't think so. And I think it's about 20 minutes into the dive. I heard it clink, 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 clink. He had a snapper on his tank, and I went and followed him, and he found one.
Dang.
And then maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, found another one. But on my second dive, as soon as like I plunged into the water and the bubbles cleared up, the only thing I saw were gem tanks big enough to eat. That was the dominant fish where I was in KwaZulu-Natal.
So you saw
in South Africa.
The
temperature was 68 degrees.
Where
we were wearing like 7 or 8 mil wetsuits.
Were you on the south, like Aliwal Shoal, or were you up north in Sodwana? I'm sure our listeners are like, what? But
I know those names, but I'm foggy on exactly where we were. I think it was Aliwal.
Okay, yeah, that place was chilly cold. It's like subtropical.
The only coral I saw was Plesiastria.
Yeah.
And it was bright white, but not bleached. It was a weird, like, pearly white.
It reminded me of, like, scuba diving. A good analogy in Florida would be, like, West Palm Beach area, like, where you're getting a bit too far north, but there's still, like, straggler corals, That's what it reminded me of. It was like, okay, we're getting a little chilly here. But that dive was also crazy to me because it felt like you had to be a Navy SEAL to dive it. Like, you're in an inflatable boat with a motor on the back. And then they're like, the cattle boats in most tropical areas, they usually latch onto a mooring ball, and then you just follow the rope down at your leisure and, depressurize your ears. Just take your time getting to the bottom. We'll see you at the bottom. And then the South Africans are like, no. You go like this and you swim straight down.
Swim down.
Because otherwise we're going to lose you in the current. And I'm like, wait, I can't just slowly descend. I actually have to swim to the bottom. Like, which is really, I don't know, for anybody that dives, probably can relate. It's hard to equalize your ears when you're rapidly descending. That dive was nuts, man. I was like, geez, these guys are hardcore. Props to South Africans and their diving, man. Phew.
Yeah.
But anyway, Yeah, that was a cool trip. It was cool to see that kind of stuff in the wild.
Cool. Well, you ready to digest our main topic of reef therapy
Yeah,
today?
this is actually a good segue because if you think about what the subject is, it's perfect. It's a perfect example.
Do you want to tell them what our subject is?
So we were talking about, hobbies that are complementary to reef keeping, things that either you develop skills in that hobby that you can translate or carry over, or ways that it helps enhance your appreciation of the hobby. So that's what we mean by complementary. And of course, scuba diving is like the fundamental, perfect example of that, right? For obvious reasons. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely a lot of hobbies and pastimes that can really enrich and inform your reef aquarium hobby experience. And we get this all the time where, I'll write an article, back in the day about LEDs, and like an electrical engineer would hit me up and give me a little bit of, pro tips, or something about corals coming in from a certain area, and a scuba diver would be like, oh hey, I've seen this one, or I don't know the name, but I recognize the picture. But yeah, I think there's a ton of hobbies that, if you're looking to branch out from the reef aquarium hobby, can just really help give you a broader understanding of things that are going on.
Yeah, very much so. I think I think a lot of our discussions sometimes that become topics have their origins outside of the hobby, maybe in other areas that we have interest in, but yet our brain starts to merge that idea with the hobby, and that's sort of where we get some of these creative topics from. So it's a good example of just how it can help you enhance your knowledge in a specific area. It can help you appreciate something more, or it can help you put another lens on something, right?
Before I went really scuba diving in the Pacific, mostly the Pacific, or just in general, you don't really have an awareness of how many habitats are, we've talked about this before, that image that we have of the postcard from the Maldives, right? Palm trees, white sandy beaches, perfect reef, crystal clear water, powder blue tanks.
Yeah.
Right? Nothing but acros. And then when you go diving in Indonesia and you find out or discover where, deep water acros are found, or Australomousas, or some of the LPS, or like trackies or ganies, it couldn't be any further from that. Most of Indonesia, where you go diving, is going to be closer to shore, heavily influenced by the land, right? So it's not unless you're like offshore Great Barrier Reef or the Maldives or the Red Sea that you get that postcard view. But that's kind of like, it's probably the dominant habitat for corals in the wild, but it is the minority habitat of where corals come from, right? Because if you're a coral collector, why are you going to boat out 20, 30 miles from shore when you can just wade out into the water and grab some stuff off the pier? Now, that's absolutely exaggerated. But when you really form an understanding of, there's clear water, there's turbid water, there's there's wave, there's surge, and then there's tidal flow. Those are two very different things, and corals are built for different habitats. So for sure, like scuba diving on Pacific reefs, because unfortunately Caribbean reefs they don't reflect where our corals come from. We don't really keep Caribbean corals. That is one of the most informative. Seeing the environmental gradient from the shore to offshore, from the shallows to the depth, it's incredible. Like I had this again. I had that postcard in my head until I dove a bunch of different places. I'm like, man, now when I go diving, I want to go to where the water is just murky enough that you can see the crocodiles, right? I'll stay away from there, but dude, there's got to be some undiscovered corals. They're living in like crocodile infested waters.
Yeah.
Right? But I always say bad diving makes for really interesting corals.
Yeah, and it changes what I think excites you, right? Instead of the tanks you see on social media fueling what excites you. I think if you go scuba diving, um, your whole you know what, gets me going and I think is really cool changes. I'm
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
in that regard. Like my fantasy is snorkeling among mangrove roots, right? And seeing softies mixed in with some turtle grass, mixed in with some carpet anemones, and that to me, like that kind of lagoon mangrove. Like I still have yet to visit a place like that, but I've visited similar places like that, and I've seen it in photographs, and I think SPS are cool and oh wow, they're so, challenging and they come in so many colors. And then you go, scuba dive and I don't know, you'll come back well, yeah, everybody's different. I came back with a greater appreciation of different types of corals and different types of
Yeah.
environments.
So, I don't want to dwell too much on scuba diving because it's not accessible for most folks, but I would say probably the next best thing that's instructive for reef aquarium keeping is other forms of aquatic keeping.
Yeah.
Freshwater and ponds. There's this one channel called the Koi Talk. And dude, I could care less what they're talking about. I just enjoy and appreciate the sophistication of the discourse. When you're dealing with koi in particular, and a cheap one in a large pond is worth thousands of dollars. Even if you bought it for a lot less than that, and then you grew it out, it's got a lot of value tied to it. They don't make up names. They don't come up with cockamamie ideas. There are koi vets. There's lots of koi vets out there that will treat the fish, and they, automatic filter rolls. That is an offshoot of pond keeping. This is where I first got the inception by going to Interzoo and seeing these giant drum filters, and then later on very large volume automatic filter rolls. And that's where I'm like, oh my God, this is absolutely the future for our hobby in 2010. And now I've got like 5 or 6 different ones around the studio. I feel like we're in the future right now. But yeah, man, those pond guys, they don't mince words. And you want to know about like high flow, high performance, very reliable pond pumps, or water pumps, you got to look to the pond guys. There's a wealth of knowledge there if you really want to get into the reeds of reef aquarium keeping. But that's where the discoveries are, right? Because they're really focused on health of the fish. And man, you think our biomedia is like fun. You should take a look at the I forget what they call them, like a rain system or something, where they just shower stuff like a mega wet dry, and it's like really, really huge. And one technology that hasn't made its way over is drum filters. And so instead of having a filter roll that you spool off, it's just like an automatic rotating drum and catches the waste and sprays that off. So maybe there's an application in the reef aquarium hobby in the future, but I don't know that anyone's working on it. But yeah, it's very informative.
Yeah, and I mean, I like watching videos of them building the ponds because it's not so much aquascaping as it is landscaping, but man, some of the people, the visions that they have of their backyards from where it starts and where it ends is mind-blowing, and it makes me go, okay, I've got a 4x2 glass box and some rocks, and I'm struggling to like aquascape it the way I want. Imagine moving giant boulders and building a waterfall and letting, analyzing.
Using an excavator to aquascape or to landscape your pond.
Yeah.
Yeah, along those same lines, man, I always thought that monster fish would be mostly the purview of like public aquariums and a few eccentric, very rich folks. But they were able to, monster fish enthusiasts, so I'm talking about arowanas, peacock basses, stingrays, gouramis. They call them giant gouramis, but to me they're just normal gouramis, right? And pacus and big catfish. Those guys, they gleaned a lot of stuff from the pond people, and they figured out how to set up huge systems of water using, kind of like temporary ponds, and then just building these showcase things inside of their homes.
Yeah.
I think Joey of DIY Fishkeeper, he installed a 2,000 gallon pond, which is like barely registers on the scale, to be honest.
Yeah, I've seen. I think it was in. I want to say maybe in the UK. The guy excavated the earth next to his basement and built like a glass panel wall. And he's got red
Ooh.
tail cats, and he's got, and so it's just a, not glass, probably acrylic, but whatever. He's got a glass wall, and on one side is a couch and a living space, and on the other side is this massive tank. Concrete walls on the other three sides, right? And I'm thinking that's hardcore. Like you,
I think that's the tank that was just featured by Mixed Fish UK.
okay,
That guy's been putting out a video every 2 days. And he's just spending all summer long just traveling all over England, checking out all this crazy stuff. And it's like, you don't have to be fully into it to just entertain some of the ideas that they're putting forth, like kind of fluidized media that's not the same fluidized media reactor that we have now, but it's starting to be more included in certain things. Like I just saw a video by Tenji where they were showing off a sump for a customer. They didn't show off the tank. I assumed it was a reef tank because there was a trident and stuff on there, but there was a fluidized media bed inside that keeps everything in suspension. And I didn't understand that stuff actually breaks down some of the mechanical waste as well as being a place for biomedia. But when it's bouncing around, and this would apply less to our reef tanks where we're just writing that razor thin margin of nutrients versus like a very heavily loaded fish aquarium, right? So I'm just, man, I love just even entertaining ideas that could apply to fresh and saltwater keeping.
yeah. I mean, I don't have one currently, but I always like having a freshwater system to complement my saltwater system too, right? It's just it. It's like speaking two languages, right? Being bilingual is beneficial for your brain, right?
It's like speaking French and English because there's a lot of overlap there.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not like speaking Arab and Chinese,
No.
right? It's a very similar language, and it's just nice to see. It's what's freaking unfair. It's unfair seeing how many tanks the freshwater people can get away with running one large high pressure air pump.
Yeah, I love watching fish room tours on YouTube where these guys have
Dude,
their
you
whole
and me both.
basement littered with 20-gallon longs and 30-gallon longs, and they just have a bunch of sponge filters everywhere with one giant air pump running the whole show. I'm like, man, that's and the reason they have so many tanks is because of another reason I'm jealous of the freshwater hobby is a massive diversity of fish. Massive compared to saltwater.
That are much easier to breed, right?
Yeah.
They can achieve that pinnacle of aquarium keeping much more readily than we can.
Yeah.
We get to the spawning part and it's like, oh, now you're just getting started for everything but like bangais. Is there anything other saltwater fish that's easier to breed? That's one thing that I'm a little bit jealous of. If saltwater fish breeding wasn't just such a commitment, it'd be so much fun to breed giant schools of zebra tangs or blue tangs or just whatever your favorite angelfish is, But yeah, there's no reason you couldn't do that for saltwater as long as you could live with the salt creep.
Oh, I know.
There'd be so much salt mist everywhere. That room would have to be really dedicated. But in some ways, it really does reflect Dick Perrin's Tropicorium, right? He ran a ton of huge tanks with just airlift. This is before propeller pumps were available, so he used a ton of airlift. So there is a ghetto fabulous way to set up a ton of tanks, but people are really locked into having a controller for their 10-gallon aquarium.
Yeah, and it's also this obsession with the quality of the source water. You have to make salt water, right? Like some of these fish rooms, they also have water changes automated, right? So they just have their tap water running through some carbon, and then they just open up a valve and they have a higher overflow in their systems.
They don't even drain the water.
Yeah.
They just turn a spigot on. Or they have it,
Right.
like I saw this one fish room where a guy was just like so freaking proud of repurposing like an irrigation controller
Yeah.
to do these automatic water changes to different tanks around his place. And he had, strung up, like, it was so much piping everywhere, and it was pretty well organized. But I'm like, goodness, I'm jealous.
There was a guy here in Atlanta that I picked up a tank from 20 years ago, and he was a freshwater guy at the time. But what was interesting is you go into his house and he had, multiple beautiful planted tanks, a discus tank, and they were all throughout his house. So they didn't seem connected at all, right? Like, oh, there's one in this room, there's one in that room, but his basement was unfinished, and he bought Reef Ready tanks, so a Reef Ready 180, a Reef Ready 125, 75, and what we would hook up the return pump, that was all tapped into PVC underneath the floor in the basement. That was tapped into his tap water with a carbon filter, and then what we would use as the drains to our sump, that drained into his sewer. That was all connected.
It's not fair.
So he just went down to the basement and just opened up a valve and did a water change on every tank in his house, and then just turned it off, and like it just, the excess water overflowed. And I was like,
Yep.
man. And I always remember reading an article about a guy. It was an article about growth inhibiting hormones. And they were doing these experiments with wild swordtails where they were feeding the crap out of them with continuous water changes so that the growth inhibiting hormones didn't build up. And they were talking about how they grew out these gigantic swordtails. And so as the kid in me always wanted to just have like some freshwater tanks with a constant automatic water exchange drip, and then just feed the crap out of them, because the nutrients are never going to build up, and just see what happens. Just see how big all your fish and how fat they are. And anyway.
So I think scuba diving, ponds, and freshwater are some kind of obvious examples of like great partner hobbies to the reef aquarium hobby.
Yeah, those are easy shoe-ins, right?
Yeah, that's some low-hanging fruit. What do you think? Photography is next?
Yeah, I think photography is a really good one. I think it's less so now that we have such amazing cameras on our phone, but there was a time where people with SLR cameras were really having a field day with their aquariums being the subject. And I mean, it used to be you went on the forums and saw so much great macro photography and fish shots. And I still think that's true even with, these great cameras that everybody has in their pockets now. But you could certainly still take it up to a next level as a hobby, right? And when you're getting into like a mirrorless setup or something that has better shutter speeds, so you can catch that really fast moving Royal Grama that's darting in and out of the rocks, right?
Dude, there is nothing like getting what I call the money shot. Just like a shot where you're like, oh, I'll take pictures almost as good as this, but nothing ever better.
Yeah.
So, man, I was so into it for a long, long time. But, after doing coral idea and fish idea and photographing every fish and every coral I came across and document them and making them into a free guide, after a while, it's like, I'm good. I'm good. Although, like, I'm really tempted to kind of get back more into it because I have a really great top-down viewer box with some built-in LEDs, blue and white. So if I shadow a coral, I'm actually re-illuminating it with the built-in lights that I put together with help from Michael Vargas. But lately, I've been wanting to photograph my branching Acropora. I'll tell you what, man, that thing looks best with the lights off. With the lights off, it looks like devil horns growing out of the rock because they're just so irregular, and they're like, gray and kind of darker at the base, and they it's like a light eggshell at the tips. It's not white, but it's kind of a yellowish color. They just look demonic in a really, really cool way. But then when the lights come on, then they're like bluish or grayish, and they just don't look as cool. They look really great in just like ambient lighting when all the lights are off, like in the morning. Yeah, usually in the morning when there's sunlight coming in, but before the lights actually come on. But yeah, I need to get a little bit more into that. I need to give myself a killer macro.
Yeah, that's what I'm missing. I have a pretty decent mirrorless setup. Actually, you can't see it. It's like right there. But But yeah, it just doesn't get enough use. I mean, I really enjoyed getting great fish shots, especially when you can really zoom in and see like the scales and everything.
Oh, when you can see detail on the scale. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness, that's next level. Angelfish are really good for that.
Yeah, and
Not
if
so
you
much
use a
surgeonfish.
remote flash instead of like your aquarium lights and kind of light them from the front without it bouncing off the glass, man, you can get some awesome fish shots.
Yeah. No, there's still something to be said. I just wish 98% of reef aquarium photography to these days wasn't just a smartphone with an orange lens under blue light. I feel like you lose so much of the details, the colors get saturated, because most of our corals are not a single shade. Like say if you have a solid orange acanthostrea, it's going to be a deeper orange in the center of the colony with a gradient to a lighter orange near the growing edge, maybe a very thin green line where it's just started growing. And if you, do the latter approach with just an orange lens and your, smartphone under blue lights, it's just going to blow out. It's going to be the one fluorescent orange ball, basically.
It's funny how that was a huge concern for aquarists 20 years ago when we were all fiddling with Nikon Coolpix cameras. Because
Yes.
everyone was like so upset that if you took a picture of a hepatus, a regal tang under any type of light fixture where you had actinics, the fish would come out purple. And that pissed off so many people. And now you go on social media and every picture is just Windexed and yellow tangs look beige and everybody's cool with it.
color.
Everybody's like, yeah, whatever. Like, you know what I meant. You know what my intent was, and we all know that
purple color
Yeah.
was partially part of Nikon's color
it
science.
was the sensor, right? Yeah.
I don't know if it was a sensor that's just right beyond my range of knowledge.
Okay.
But back in the day, I could point out when a picture was taken with a Nikon.
Yeah.
Because those blues would turn out a little bit more purple.
Yep.
It was kind of, you'd definitely see it. Yeah. And there's a lot of old pictures of like purple blue tangs out in the world.
Yeah, I think it's funny that now if something it doesn't one, we're photoshopping corals and making them look crazier than they actually are, but then the people like when they don't do that, everybody's cool with it just looking all drowned out. I almost feel like photography was better a while ago. I think the quality. Although, I mean, shout out to Tan at Tidal Gardens. He did a coral feeding video recently.
Than has the best coral
my
representation
God.
in the hobby.
Yeah.
He captures the colors. He'll show you the corals in 10K, 15K, 15,000 Kelvin spectrum. Untouchable, man. That guy is another level.
Yeah, he did time lapse of like feeding corals. I think he released a video today or yesterday, and it just blew my mind. I was having so much fun watching these corals eat.
So, as an aside, I've been concerned less with corals taking in the food than looking at what the coral or anemone poops.
And he covers
Right, 'cause
that. Did you watch the video?
Oh, I didn't watch the end.
Because
I watched the beginning.
Oh yeah, he gets into different species of corals, and are they actually ingesting it, or are they, sloughing it off, or trying to get rid of it, like you said. And it made me think of our conversation when I was in Golden with you in person, where you had a theory about larger size foods getting rejected more, right?
Well, maybe they're not getting rejected, right? Maybe they're just like, sucking on the outside, and at some point they got to kick it out. And I think that's the next level of like, what does the poop of the animal look like? And I know that's hard to really nail down, but I have a lot of bare bottom tanks, a lot of different corals, and I know what I feed. And I'll tell you what, the finer the food, the better it is for the coral. But honestly, man, to this day, I've not found a food that corals take as readily as cyclopes. I remember I have pictures buried deep in generations of old hard drives of an Acropora, like holding on to and ingesting copepod, and just you think to yourself like, no way, that's not even possible. But I had the picture and I was like, holy crap, the Acropora polyp, the old gray strain that Ori sold back in the day. Yeah, they would capture it. And so I feel like I didn't watch the whole video. I definitely, skipped ahead and watched a couple things. The imagery was really great, but I think there's more conversation to be had, not just as the coral ingest it, but what is coming out of the coral. Because I'll tell you what, even when I feed small pellets, just, fish food side pellets to my 18-inch blue carpet anemone, a day or two later, there's little pellets sitting around the bottom with a nice layer of basically of rot, like that white rot, So maybe it sucks some juices off. Maybe it can digest a little layer off the top of it. The one exception though is my Coronactis ball tentacle anemones. They will strip a fish down to its bones.
Really?
Oh yeah, they are actually, dude. I went down a little rabbit hole to really learn more about them. If you ever want to learn about something just beyond superficial, go to scholar.google.com, find a couple articles, just read the introduction, the figures, which is what they call pictures, and then the conclusion. Right? You don't have to read the whole thing and digest it like a scientist, but they are specialists at eating starfish. How crazy is that? They're like one of the main predators of crown of thorn starfish.
Nice.
And they're incredibly sticky. So it's a shroom that specialized and adapted to eating very bony starfish. Yeah, anytime a fish is not looking great, we just go send it to see the doctor, ball tentacle anemone. Then a couple days later, just a little pile of bones sitting next to it.
That's awesome. It's like your disposal unit for any fish that pass away.
No, it's the doctor. He goes to see the doctor, and everything's good.
Dr. Kevorkian.
Well, no, it's just there's something about if you have I guess some of the freshwater aquarists will feel me on this. Is if you have a fish that's ailing but it's not necessarily sick, and you use it to feed a bigger fish, it doesn't feel like as much of a waste. You know what I mean? So I've worked at some aquarium stores where we definitely had a doctor fish in the back. But all right, see if you can follow me on this. This is going to be a really long thread, but this I think really highlights.
Are you done with the photography piece?
Unless you have more to say.
No, I was gonna not get too heavy into it, but a somewhat related one would be microscopy or microscopes, right? Microscopy. They've gotten so cheap, like for decent ones. You can get ones that you can mount your iPhone on. And man, you mentioned the word rabbit hole. Like go with your little pipette and take some water out of your substrate or like a patch of live rock and put that on a slide and just have fun. I mean, it's crazy what you can discover underneath.
I have one. I bought a digital microscope with screen and lights for less than $100.
Yeah.
And I want to get a better one in the future, but I'd like to find someone who knows a little bit more about them so I can get, not like top of the line $500, but I think I could get a lot of bang for my buck for like $300. But this $60, $70 one with the screen, man, it's got a 7-inch screen and it'll record photos and videos. It's not awesome. But I can see the tiny things I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Those are really, really cool. And they've been instructive a little bit on when I was having kind of like the euphilia problems when we were doing reef therapy last year, where I started treating the tank with chemicleans and some other antibiotics. I could see the little spinny things, but not beyond that. But it was incredible because there's a 7-inch screen built right in. It does feel a little slightly archaic that you gotta pull out the micro SD card and go pop that into something else for export. But, that's firmly a first world problem there. But yeah, no, that's a great point. If you want to really rope in your kids and teach them about science, digital microscopes on Amazon are huge.
Oh, yeah.
You can start out for like $50 and get up to whatever you want for different features.
I did that with my kids, cool. And we not only did we pull stuff out of the aquarium, but then we ordered slides that were pre-prepared. You can order like examples of different things, and man, they had a blast. So, and I know not to go back to dinos, I know the dino guys are becoming microscope experts because, again, the treatment is based on the type of dinos you have, so they're all using microscopes to ID them. That
crystallizes our point, though.
Yeah.
The multidisciplinary, like once upon a time, if you were a scientist, you were either a biologist, a geologist, an astronomer, or what have you, right? But when I went to school for marine science, you had to be like a jack of all trades. You had to know statistics and, something about computers and oceanography and good at math. You had to tie in all these disciplines, and that's exactly what we're talking about. And so, like, the microscopy you brought up, I'm like, I hear in a little while the most progressive aquarists who really want to learn something, and coral farms. Every single one of them should have one of these digital scopes. Like, corals are too valuable not to investigate issues when they arise. You can't the answer cannot always be just frag it down.
Yeah.
That can't always be the answer, right? Because we're missing so much and saving so little. And so I'm really glad you brought up that point, because, if an army of us all just have a mesoscope or digital microscope as part of our aquarium toolbox, we're going to start to be able to identify different species of dinoflagellates. Hey, Matt, could you imagine the average reefer knowing different types of dinoflagellates like in a decade from now? Because everybody's got a digital microscope. They go on the dino help group and they're like, oh, what kind of dino do you have? And they'll be like, oh, yeah, I just popped into the scope and it looks mostly like this species. Oh, okay, well, this is the treatment you need.
It's exactly where they're at, right? They're like, oh, no, you got the other species. UV is not going to help you. You just save that guy how much money? You can probably go buy a cheap Amazon UV, but let's just assume they're going to go out and buy like a Aqua UV or an Emperor Aquatics or something. Like, you just save the guy $400 potentially, because he could have plugged that in and been like, nah, nothing's happening. It's like,
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
This sounds a little bit far-fetched to some of the listeners who might be a little bit more casual of thinking about getting a digital scope. Setting up a digital scope and popping something under there is easier than calibrating one probe on your aquarium controller. Like, just incredibly easy. Plug it in, hit a button, saves a picture for you. The only thing that's not yet is smart or Wi-Fi enabled. I'm sure there's some models out there, but one that I could take a picture with that would just beam right to my phone for sharing and processing and using. Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, I have one. I have two mesoscopes, a bunch of different what is that? Portals and magnifying glasses for my aquariums. And once in a while, man, they're really, really instructive. It might sit dusty on the shelf for 2 or 3 months, but I think it was maybe 2 months ago, I found 2 sea spiders in my tanks.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, one was in one tank and one was in another tank. And I was like, what the hell? What was weird is that one of them that we found was shortly after we had dosed Interceptor, which I know has been a treatment for them. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Dude, it is one of the goofiest creatures ever. The way it moves its legs and it's just like walking all super awkwardly. Oh, goodness. I'm really glad you brought up microscopy, because I feel like that ties it back into some of the problems with the dinoflagellates.
Yeah. Sorry, you were about to go on a I think a more creative one. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I figure it's...
One thing that is not even part of our reef aquarium conversation is fungi.
Yeah.
Right? But it was Steve Garrett at the Acropolis. He told me he was the first guy who ever turned me on to feeding yeast. Just simply drop the yeast in your water. It does have, phosphates, so you're adding phosphates in your tank. But when you dose it for a while, not even that long, I'm going to say a few days or a week or two, you can turn over like certain coral bases and see this little white film that has every indication of being kind of fungusy and stringy. And so, as far as like tangents and just really sideways hobbies, I'm big into freshwater plants, and I wanted to have I used to grow cannabis strictly for medical purposes because I live in Colorado. It's legal, right?
Is.
But I learned a lot about mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae basically form the rootlets of all plants. And if you want to learn about the best mycorrhizae to add for any planted application, you go to the bonsai guys, right? So if the pond guys have the lock on just high performance, really reliable equipment to protect their tens of thousands of dollars of fish, the bonsai guys, they know the most about soil. Like, they are freaking obsessive. I have watched multiple, like, hour-plus long seminars of people just drilling down into bonsai, soil, and mycorrhizae, right? Because they're miniature trees that have the smallest possible root mass, and they have to maximize what is going into their trees and similar plants. And so they're really diehard about their mycorrhizae. So I have a package of mycorrhizae that I use on my freshwater tank, and I use it on my mangroves. When I put out the refugite, gave a little sprinkling of the mycorrhizae, and I understand that I don't have to like the mycorrhizae will spread, and there's something about mycorrhizae that just will thrive in fresh water. I don't know about salt water, but I did it anyway.
Why not?
Right? But it brings it back to dosing the yeast that Steve Garrett taught me. And that's a whole unexplored avenue of reef aquarium keeping. Like, we don't know this, right? But dendronephtheas, a lot of them have root-like structures that they use to anchor themselves into soft sediments. Some of them firmly grow on rocks. But what if there's the missing component is some mycorrhizae-like fungi that, gives them a little bit more support? I don't think it's true, but it should be, investigated, right? Fungus are huge. They're an important part of life. And I'm not saying that anyone needs to go add mycorrhizae to anything. There's no such thing as saltwater mycorrhizae, but I thought it wouldn't really hurt to add it to my mangroves. And I'm looking at my mangrove trees from here, and I want to start over, right? How many times have you seen somebody have a mangrove like this big for years? My mangroves went from this to full-on baby trees in 1 year. And now I kind of want to restart, especially realizing how much more important misting is than I ever realized, and seeing how fast they can actually grow. I don't want to get rid of these mangroves, but I'm thinking, okay, I can take these mangroves out, set up a more permanent pond display here in the studio, just grow the heck out of some trees, and then restart some mangroves where I currently have my trees, and then use the art of bonsai to get them really nice and tight and bushy. Right? We're off the deep end now.
No, I love it.
We're talking about reef tanks and bonsai, and mangrove trees and fungus. Yeah. So I mean, I'm not soliciting comments. We're here to share a conversation with you, but this is a good moment if you have a specialty or hobby has some intersection with aquarium keeping or aquatics or aquaculture, hydroponics, or reef keeping, let us know right now in the comments. I sincerely want to know and learn anything that can give me a leg up on my aquariums.
Yeah.
Even if they don't improve anything, but like, other than my understanding, dude, that's enriching. That's really cool. So I'm sure there's some people listening that are into bonsais right now, freshwater fish, ponds, growing some of that reefer. I know there's some of you guys out there. One tip, another thing that's taboo to talk about maybe is like horticulture, but I learned some interesting tricks when it comes to growing the ganj. And one of those is to dose up to a point where you start seeing leaf burn, and then you flush, because the plant has had enough. I'm not saying I apply that approach to my corals, but I know that I know in my bones, I know I don't need a hidden number when it comes to trace elements and nutrients. If I'm dosing so much phosphate and nitrate and certain suite of trace elements, even if my number is 0, that's fine, because I know I put it in the tank. So if it's 0, that means it went into the corals or into the the animals there, right? And there's a lot of hobbies. Can you think of some other hobbies besides maybe vintage aquarium book collecting that might be informative?
No, I mean, you got into gardening in general there as well, right? I mean, bonsai,
cloning.
Yeah, a lot of it is it's kind of wrapped up in I think being a gardener, right? Whether it's houseplants, whether it's a yard, whether you're obsessed with having like a golf course lawn. Like there's guys in my neighborhood that they have reel mowers instead of rotary mowers, and they sand their yard and they like cut their grass till it's like a centimeter tall. It's like a putting
I know a
green.
guy like that.
And ain't my cup of tea, but I can totally because it. I think all of these things appeal to the same senses or whatever you want to call it. That as a reef keeper, I can look at that and be like, I can appreciate your obsession, man. I can appreciate.
When you let's say you just have a guest over who's a gardener and you start explaining to them how you propagate the corals, they totally get it.
Yes, it's like you're talking this similar language again. You're like, oh wait, I know exactly what you're talking about. And
I dose this and I dose that, and I make sure the environment is this, and then we clone them, we frag them, we propagate them, this and that.
yep, like those guys can talk to you about like. I asked one of those guys about a sprinkler schedule, right? Because I got a sprinkler system and it's super hot here. Dude, I got like a science education in hydrating lawns that I think most people would go in and be like, oh boy, I just opened a can of worms. How do I get out of this? But as a sciencey nerd, I was digging every minute of him explaining everything about, and then, okay, as the seasons begin to change and the weather starts to cool off, here's what you want to do. And I was like, yeah.
You're like, yeah, I'm not going to do any of this, but keep talking.
I know. I'm like, let me get a beer. I'm not going to do any of it. No, I mean, he started talking about, watering the same amount. It's like watering for 2 hours on one day or 1 hour 2 days a week, right? And just how he's like, well, if you live in Arizona, you want to water more frequently and spread it out. But we live in a humid environment and we want to make sure everything dries out, or else you get fungus on your lawn, right? Because it just stays too damp. And anyway, not that I'm sure I'm getting that wrong because I'm not a lawn person, but same thing. 20 years ago, there was a tank tour around that I went to, and we ended up at this guy's house, and he had a softy tank. But in his backyard, on his deck, he had a crap ton of bonsai trees, and I was like, I'm out. I'm going out there,
Yeah, I've seen all this stuff before. Let me go see some new stuff.
Dude, a half hour, it probably was more. It was so long ago, but he and I were just talking about bonsai trees. I know nothing about keeping a bonsai tree, right? But I was so fascinated about this different obsession that he had, and all the people inside were like, what the hell, man, we're here for your reef tank, you're out there. So I can relate. I get it.
Along the same lines of the bonsai people and the weed growers, like I understand a little bit more of the philosophy behind like trimming a branch and how that stimulates more branching. Mm-hmm. This is really well documented when it comes to plants, right? Because they have nodes and they have internodes. And I want to learn a little bit more about bonsaiing my saltwater mangrove trees. But I wonder how much of that might really apply to our corals. There is something there. When you keep trimming a coral, it just sends up more, like an acro, it sends up more axial tips. And we just haven't even begun to scratch the surface because people are just really just preoccupied with, selling little tiny frags for a ton of money and getting as many, tiny little pieces as possible. But I'd like to learn and see if I can, transpose some of if it applies. What happens to a tree or a bonsai or a wheat plant when you trim it or you fem it, versus an acro that's really arborescent? Do some of the same rules apply, right? There's just not enough of a body of knowledge, but we can at least inform ourselves and have a starting point by learning from other disciplines. I love this conversation, bro. I love it. I really do.
Yeah, and I think if you're the type of person that obsesses over your reef tank, you will be a good plant grower. You will be a good gardener, right? I mean, we've all met the person that's like, I bought a house plant once and it just died, And the reef hobbyist would be like, why? What was I doing wrong? How do I do it better the next time? What does it mean if the tips of my plants are dying, right? What does that mean? And then that in quest for knowledge and figuring out and solving the problem, inadvertently makes you a great hobbyist in yet another hobby, right? So I think the other one is probably a weird one and maybe more personal is fishing. And it sounds weird because we like to keep them in boxes and care for them and they're our pets. But it's something about if you've kept fish in aquariums, freshwater, saltwater your whole life, you speak a little bit of fish, you know, you understand, and you can look at a creek or a river and be like, that's where I'm going to put my lure, right? Like you just know where fish are going to hang out.
I know I've told you this before, but I haven't been fishing that many times. I love watching other people fish. Like I don't need to cast the rod myself. But Dave Faison of Nanobox Reef, he came out a handful of years ago, and we went and fished, fly fished this really cool pond. And then when we were coming back, I was like, you know what? There's this really cool, river, like goes through my town. I think I know a couple spots, and without just any recon, I was looking at the river. I'm like, yeah, go hit over there, dude. We hit so many rainbow trouts. It wasn't even funny, right? And I'm not versed in fishing, but just having the marine science background and aquarium background, I'm like, I'm pretty sure the fish are hiding right there. Sure enough, man, almost every cast there was a good colorful male to be brought up.
Yeah, and like lures are meant to mimic insects, arthropods. They're meant to mimic aquatic creatures, right? And it's like a guy that's stared at an aquarium a whole lot knows how to move like a grub through the water and make it look lifelike, right? Like, because we've seen polychaetes like swimming around, like not bristleworms, but the kind I'm talking about that like go out into the water.
You would just know it instinctively without being able to describe it.
Yeah.
But along those same lines, seeing how far into the weeds the reef aquarium hobby can go, the same thing applies, right? Yeah. I can immunize myself against, if I really ever got into fly fishing, I'm like, I think I could do okay with like 3 or 4 different kinds of flies. I don't think I need a whole giant library catalog because someone said this one is for this fish at this place at this time of year. You see people just going down into the weeds, and when you've gone into the weeds in one hobby and then pulled back to more fundamentals, you realize, you're going to get 90% of the success with 10% of the effort. The extra 90% that you keep pushing and pushing to optimize, like a lot of folks do with reef tanks. This is kind of like the reverse conversation, how the reef hobby trains you for other hobbies. And like, okay, I don't need to go that deep.
Yeah.
I don't need to go that deep.
That's true too. Yeah. You can, it's an excuse to buy a lot of cool gadgets.
Gadgets are fun.
Yeah.
I love every single one of them, almost every single one of them.
Although I will say, I don't know, I'm pretty superstitious about lures where, it's like, oh no, I just got to change color. And then like suddenly I start catching the fish and I'm like, it's because I changed the color,
Yeah.
The black woolly bugger worked yesterday, but today I had to go with a moss green one, and
there you go.
It's probably just luck of the draw that, the fish was like, yeah, all right. But
yeah, and if you happen to be a plumber or a woodworker or just handy with tools and things, that can also enrich your reef building experience. It's nice to have a friend that can slap together a great stand or a custom sump. But yeah, I'll just say it again. Can you think of any other hobbies that can really inform the reef aquarium hobby itself?
No, I mean, you mentioned woodworking, and another one that popped in my brain is I'm fascinated observing from a distance what the Reef Pi folks are doing, where they're using a Raspberry Pi and they're essentially building out their own controller from it, right? And they're and obviously that is not necessary to keep a reef tank, but it's guys that have backgrounds in probably development and coding that are having an enjoyment, writing code and automating things. And, some of that's probably also some electrical engineering, but they're using those skills to build a system, a life support system for organisms that they're passionate about. I think that's super cool. Yes, you can go buy a controller off the shelf, right? But that's not the point. Like the point for them is that journey. So.
Yeah, right now our automatic alkalinity testing machines are nothing more than robots that kind of repeat what we do in an automated fashion. And I know in my bones that there's an alkalinity probe possible. It'll take a lot of R&D, but then once you figure out kind of the trick, next thing you know, it's in the hobby, side of things, right? So people from like the Reef Pi side, they might be the ones to really put forward some certain breakthroughs, right? Because they're going to be a little bit more nimble and not necessarily financially motivated.
Right.
They might find a patent out there and be like, "Ooh, this might be kind of cool to make for myself. Let me see if I can do this." So I imagine that Neptune Systems, sprang out of kind of a hobby project or something akin to it that started really basic and rudimentary that blossomed into the amazing ecosystem of controller devices and accessories we have now.
There was a guy on Reddit that had a house plant, and the users would vote on whether the plant needed water. And so once enough votes were hit, this automated thing would water the plant. And whenever I see the Reef Pi stuff, if I had all the time in the world and all the money in the world, I mean, I guess it wouldn't require a lot of money. I always think it would be awesome to set up maybe like a 20-gallon tank and have an automated water exchange, have dosers, have everything built into it. And then, a webcam, and just to have like this crowdsourced management of a reef tank where everybody kind of votes. Like, not one pissed off kid in a basement's not going to nuke the tank, right? It has to be a consensus of like
the wisdom of the crowd.
Yeah. Yeah, especially as automated testing starts to become more mature, where they would have all the metrics of what the pH and what the alkalinity and stuff is. I don't know. It's probably not as cool as I think it would be. But I when I saw that Reddit guy with his plant, I thought that'd be kind of fun to do.
The Trident was a hobby project.
Yeah.
The Trident started out with a machine created by Jim Welch. I'm pretty sure that I'm remembering his name correctly. And then Neptune Systems just bought the rights to it, and then they developed it into a commercial product. And so I do see, more of the breakthroughs actually coming from the tinkerers, from the reef therapy listeners, people who have some side hobbies that have overlap with the reef aquarium hobby, and either they'll start their own company or they'll team up with an established brand to bring some of these things to market. Man, we definitely approached this session of reef therapy without a clue what we were going to talk about. It was literally in the pre-gaming. They were like, "Hey, let's talk about hobbies related to the reef aquarium hobby." And this is my kind of one of my favorite aspects of reef keeping is how much parallels there are with other things.
Yeah, and I would like to hear in the comments.
We really want to hear it this time.
Yeah, like what are some things that you guys do in terms of hobbies or side gigs or whatever that you enjoy, that you feel enhances or helps your hobby or your passion in reef keeping? Because I know there's got to be more, right? There's got to be so many more that we're just not thinking of.
Well, we just kind of pointed out the obvious ones, but I have a average level of lab experience, which helps me to test my water a little bit more diligently. And I think there'll be some other folks who just maybe are great plumbers or know a little bit more about fluid dynamics that apply that to their tanks. Or man, there's got to be so many great ideas out there that just haven't reached out. Maybe we could do a crowdsourced reef therapy episode where people tell us what to talk about. That would be pretty fun. But this was a fun session. I think this would be really informative for you guys to tell us your other passions that help you get a better understanding of the reef aquarium hobby or apply, the fundamentals of reef keeping. So we're sincerely interested to hear what you guys have to say in the comments on the YouTube channel. If you're listening to this via podcast, make sure to rate us and give us 1,000 stars. I think we're rating about 4.9 right now.
Nice.
I didn't even look. I think I stumbled across it and I was just like, oh, Reef Therapy 4.9 rating, like 200 ratings. I'm like, that's pretty good. So, but no, we don't do this for the ratings. We do this selfishly for our own reef therapy. I had my own challenges today, and I feel a lot better after talking it out with Mark.
Yeah, I feel better about my dino invasion round 2.
Send me an invite to that dino group because, again, even if I'm not having any problems, I think I'd be fascinated. I think it'd be a very instructive group to follow. I don't know what it is. I think the summertime people are getting rid of tanks like ad infinitum, and if there's like 10 or 12 groups in a local area, the same person will post like 8 times. So I put all my freshwater and saltwater groups on pause, on snooze for 30 days. I'm like, I can't.
Oh, because it's all for sale.
All for sale. And somebody wants $175 for very used, original Kessel little cannon lights. What is that thing called? I don't even remember what it's called anymore.
A150 or that one?
Yes, the A150, A160. I need one of those in my collection, actually, now that they're getting a little bit more vintage.
I have 2. One of them fell into the tank and was still lighting their corals submerged.
Oh, wow.
But it finally started to act up, so it's now...
You know what? It might be the power supply. Sometimes that is usually the power supply gives out before the light.
Yeah, well, that... And again, not to, like, plug them, but I was like, that made me respect the product. I'm like, all right, that thing is a submerged light right now, and it's working.
You didn't hear this from me, but I believe that they created a version that was mounted to a deep sea submersible.
Oh, wow.
Like potted everything, encased in resin. I don't know the details. This is a conversation long time ago. But thanks for another session of Reef Therapy, Mark.
Yes.
It's good to go back to back, because we just did this on Sunday for like a makeup session when you were just on the tail end of Corona.
Yes.
I'm glad you're feeling better, and everybody out there, definitely stay safe. And we'll catch you on another session very soon.
Sounds good.
Bye, everyone.